Okay, Brand, we are back with the VIP video interview with James Mitchell. Now you're getting a look at him. Look at him. Is that, Jim, I look at you and I think money. I mean, is it just me or what is it?
I certainly hold the same. Apparently, I couldn't get some other brain trust in the wrestling business to feel the same way over the
Well,
last 6 years.
we're going to talk about that in a minute. Jim, I
Okay.
want to now concentrate back on you because there are a couple of things. Now, when I started going into your background, I got to ask you this one question, okay?
Okay.
Now, Jim, when you went to Smoky Mountain, I'm assuming at that point you went from Carolinas and Virginia where you got started, then you made your way to Smoky Mountain, right? Now,
Yep.
I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, when you went to Smoky Mountain, James E is running that territory, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's the funny thing, Jim. Now, you'll appreciate this. Bro, you know Jim Cornette. I mean, he's been hammering me for 15 years. And Jim, I never respond because I'm not going to engage Jim Cornette. Like that,
Right.
that's the last thing I want to do. So like
Right.
I never respond. I just take it all, right?
Right.
But then, and then, I mean, it's always the thing about, I don't respect the wrestling business. I kill the wrestling business. I mean, that whole shtick, right?
Right.
Then I'm reading the notes today, Jim, and shed some light on this, please, for the guy that killed the wrestling business. First of all, I want to ask you this: your first name in Smoky Mountain is Daryl Van Horn or Von Horn?
Yes. Van Horn.
I love that name. How did that come about?
I stole it from the Witches of Eastwick with Jack Nicholson.
Was
With,
that his
Yeah,
name?
yeah, that was the name of the devil in it, Daryl Van Horn.
Well, hey, let me ask you this too. I gotta believe, Jim, unless I'm totally cuckoo, Angel Heart had to be a big influence for you, no?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, Louis Cipher, the
Unbelievable.
And see, the thing is, I wouldn't pull my hair down, and you made me pull the hair down, and I looked at it, and I went, wow, I got Angel Heart going on here too,
That was such a phenomenal movie, man. De Niro was unbelievable.
One of my all-time favorites.
Okay, so now is Daryl Van Horn. Correct me as I'm wrong. Just let me preface everything. I'm the man that killed wrestling. Did you manage a Prince Cons who
Karras.
was
Karras.
Karras. Prince Karras, who was a 4,000-year-old mummy?
Yes, I think the years that his age changed from 3,500 to 35,000 a couple of times, depending on who was doing color commentary. But yes, so here's the thing. I think I told you earlier during the audio, pro wrestling as I would like it to be, right? Which is me sending my army of guys after Bruno Sammartino, for 3-month runs in the garden.
Right.
That's what I want it to be.
Yeah.
But it's not anywhere. Not going to be there. But Smoky Mountain was the last company I worked for that came as close from start to finish to being what I thought wrestling should be. So I'd sent Cornette a tape earlier or something, and I had read that he had put me over like in a torch talk or something with Wade Keller like in 1992 or 91, and he said at the time of me, he said, I did get a tape from a guy named Daryl Van Horn, but he looks and dresses a little bit too much like Paulie Dangerously. But if he maybe changed something up a little bit, I think he could do something because he's really got talent and you can tell he really wants to do it. So I didn't hear from him for like a year. Then I get the phone call. Now I'm thinking, when Cornette calls me, maybe I'm going to manage Bobby Eaton or Arn Anderson, I think was working there a little bit, because in my mind at that point, when I was still at the point of copying stuff from managers, I was still just sitting and studying Bobby Heenan and J.J. Dillon, basically, and I thought that Cornette and Heyman were a little too close in age to me, so I intentionally wouldn't watch them, because you know what I mean? I knew they were going to be, when I wore glasses, they called me that. When I had a ponytail, they called me Heyman, and it had nothing to do with any of them. So I went out of my way to not watch them. I mean, peripherally, I got them. So I go in there thinking I'm going to be an old school wrestling manager. Right. And I don't know who they're going to give me, but it's going to be great. Because look, on the indies, I'd been managing like Paul Orndorff and stuff like that. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, yeah, maybe it'll give me Orndorff. He'd been through there too, And he says, Jim Cornette, hey, Daryl Van Horn, glad to have you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm nervous. This is the call I've been waiting for my life.
Yep.
And from a manager, no less. You know, I'm thinking, I got a great spot. And he says, you're going to manage Prince Karis the Mummy. And it was like, as high as the adrenaline rush was, which was like, you know, some premium, 1982 Miami Vice snow, right? It was like through the roof adrenaline rush. And he says a mummy. And it was like throwing the car in reverse at 100 miles an hour. I went, what?
Jim, again, I never watched any Smoky Mountain.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, but like, what is his gimmick? I mean, what does he look like? He looks like a mummy.
Here's the way it was explained to me. He goes, he's going to be a mummy. He said, eventually we will reveal that he's not a mummy.
Okay.
He said, but what you're going to do, he said, you are going to sell that mummy like he's a real mummy. And the people are going to say that's BS. But you are never going to break character. You are never going to reveal, you know what I mean? We want to build the illusion that, you know, everybody knows something's up, that you're a shady guy perpetrating a fraud, and we never even got around to that. So anyhow, I show up to TV the first time. I brought Canyon with me, I think, the first time I went up, you know, because I had a crappy car, you know. I had to get a friend with a good car. And I even lied to Canyon. I said, Canyon, he's going to do a mummy, but I'm going to do promos for a couple months before the mummy shows up just to build the mummy. I said, but maybe I can get you on as the mummy because he needs a tall guy. And so through that, I did get him some job spots in Smokey, but he never became the mummy. So I get there and I do promos for a couple of months. I have no idea what the mummy's going to look like. And Cornette, at that point, he made me look like the Abdullah Farouk, the Grand Wizard.
Okay.
Right? So, and now again, I'm in Smoky Mountain. It's my first time, but I'm thinking, and I hate knockoffs. I despise knockoffs of any kind, right? But, so he says, I want you to get a fez, glasses, and whatnot. So I was like, okay, damn it, I'll do it. So I did it. And I went out there and I did great, entertaining promos, okay? Very entertaining. And it was obvious from the first day I was in there, I guess you would call me an idiot savant because I had several years of crappy indie wrestling behind me and no knowledge of how to deal with real wrestlers, you know. Mm-hmm. But immediately you could tell I was a notch above a lot of people when I opened my mouth. However, I also, you know, I just had to talk about a mummy for a couple months. So at that station in life when I was immature and whatever and wanting to be more provocative, I actually used that as a format because we're talking about bringing something back from the dead, making him walk, to kind of go out of my way to be blasphemous and offensive to all the hillbillies in the Smoky Mountain area. And I took a look on it now, like I feel bad about it, but I took some brutal shots at religion. You know, the mummy gave me and here's the thing, because I wasn't there to sell that, right? As standalone performance art, it's kind of interesting. But I look at it now and I tell people, oh, that was great. I go, no, because I wasn't selling. I was selling something else other than what it should have been. So anyway, but I build that up and I got heat because I talked over everybody's head, right? They're like, Van Horn, where'd you get learned from? Where'd you learn them big words? How'd you get learned? Where'd you get them words? We don't talk like that in the holler. So for the mummy to show up, and he's a nice guy. I mean, you'll rarely find me say a bad word about anybody in the rest of this. But he was kind of a green guy named Rob Mazie. Big guy, though. About, probably 6'9", 6'10". Well, I don't know what the mummy's going to look like. So Cornette pulls out a rubber zombie mask, all right? A rubber zombie mask and a bunch of super bright gauze. So we put the guy in a pure white, like go to Walmart and buy it off, like a suit, right? And then we wrap him in tape, and he's got sneakers on. He's got white sneakers. So we're looking at him, and I don't know much about television production, but I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Something about how white burns on video. He like turned blue kind of, and like when he was on screen, the video would go because it was so white. If you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So and so at first we brought him in there, and so they taped the stuff around, so you saw the eyes, but basically, and maybe the mouth. So, but he's still got a bunch of Johnson and Johnson gauze and white, pure cherry white. I mean, pure virgin white. What do you call it? Medical tape around him, and white sneakers and white gloves, like he was going to the opera, right? So he comes out, and we put baby powder on him so that Tim Horner, who he was wrestling, could touch him and the smoke would come off, right? Okay. So he comes out. Now this is Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And, everybody's waiting on this abortion to happen. All the guys in the back are like, what's going to happen? And the crowd has no idea what they're about to say. The Mummy comes out, and as I recall, it was stunned silence. Like, what? And so out comes this guy doing to some crazy music. And I get in there and I start speaking in tongues. And again, not knowing what I was doing, I'm basically using a lot of profanity and sexual terms, but I'm speaking it in Carney, right. So couched in, then I'm using Carney to say profane things. Right. And so the match goes off, and it's just the video and the audio is bad because he's so white, and it totally, the turd in the punch bowl doesn't work at all. So after that, we said, we gotta fix this. We gotta dirty you up. And here's the other thing: the guy was claustrophobic. I swear to God, he was claustrophobic. Jeez. So what we had to do, because we'd wrapped him up so tight, what we had to do every week was cut him out of the mummy suit, right? And then we'd tape him up the next week. But we'd go to we were in, these National Guard armies, high schools. We would roll him around in the dirty basement to get him nasty, roll him around in the playground, spray hairspray on him and sprinkle dirt on him and stuff like that. And he could never wash the mummy suit. Right? He had to keep it dirty. So now he smells like a monkey's wedding every time he goes to the ring. And he's claustrophobic, sweating his ass off. And it was a total flop. Now, my understanding of that was, Cornette at the time had told me, he said, look, we already know the mummy's dead in the water, but just get yourself over and use this as a platform to get yourself over, and we'll get you somebody down the road. Well, before I got myself fired for pissing Jim Cornette off and incurring his wrath in his unique way, it was just obvious it was a flop. They tried to blow it off real. So there never was any real resolution to the fact that that it was a gimmick or anything. I mean, I never got a chance to be exposed as a fraud. And we did one thing too. I went out there and cut a big promo about whatever he was going to do, and said, just to prove that he's real, I'm going to cut his thumb off. Right now, he's got this white opera glove on, filled with sand in the palm, right, and the thumb of it is filled with sand, and his hand's kind of like this, right, with the thumb filled out. And I went out, did my shtick, and cut the thumb off so he could pour the sand off. And I mean, it was cheesy as hell. Now I will. So it was funny that Cornette, of all people, put me in that spot, which all goes back to my point that all wrestling from the time I got in it has always been a compromise and trying to make the best out of what I was given to work with. But the thing I heard was that Rick Rubin, the music producer? From Def Jam recordings or whatever. Apparently he was the money man, and he grew up somewhere where they had a mummy wrestler, and he told Cornette he wanted a mummy. Now Cornette at that point was managing most of the heels, but he was probably given the memo. You're going to put a mummy on if you want this. I mean, Rick Rubin wants a mummy. He's going to get a mummy. Well, hey, he did Run DMC. He did Slayer. He did the Black Crowes. What do you know? You're going to question him? The mummy was not one of his good creative decisions. So
what eventually then happened between you and Cornette to you leaving the territory?
Well, I guess the statute of limitations has worn off after 20 years, 21 years. Somebody called me, and again, this is where I didn't understand pro wrestling etiquette. I understood indie etiquette, which is totally different. What you do in the neighborhood isn't the same. I was going through some rough patch. I forget, like I think my mom had gotten cancer or something, and I'd got fired from my day job, which was horrible, like driving a truck in a warehouse or something. So I went out and got liquored up. Somebody called me and said, "Hey, have you heard the news? Jim Cornette's wife left him, therefore Smoky Mountain's going out of business." Something like that. Well, like a dumbass, I didn't call just one person. I used to be bad about drunk dialing. I drunk dialed his whole production crew, such as it was, and they were even telling me, "You don't want to get into this," you know.
Right.
And then I'd hang up and just compulsively, "Hey, did you hear? Is it true we're going out of business next week? You know, because I need a job, and is it because of his wife?" Oh my God! About 45 minutes later, Daryl Van Horn, Jim Cornette. "What business of it is yours if I have 29 wives like Henry VIII and you son of a bitch?" And everything,
boy, yeah.
like 30 minutes of "You're garbage. I hate you. You're a mark."
Yeah.
And then he said, but when it was over, he said, "I'll tell you what," he goes, "everybody knows you did this. You got so much heat. I can't bring you back in the locker room. You know, I can't have you acting like this, you mark, and then come waltzing back in the locker room." So I told him, whoever told me it, and then I guess he went and cursed that guy out, you know?
Yeah.
So he said, "I'll try to bring you back." And then he called me once or twice about maybe bringing me back, and it never happened. So then I was out of wrestling for another long while.
And then you went to WCW. How did that come about?
I had helped Canyon. I met Canyon through the what do you call it, classifieds in the Wrestling Observer for tape trades and stuff like that.
Right.
And actually, a friend of mine met him and kind of wanted to rip him off, you know, like get a bunch of tape. I forget what it was, but there was something sleazy about the meeting. But my friend wanted to bring me as the convincer so that Canyon would give him some tapes, you know. And because at that point I'd been on Smoky Mountain. No, I hadn't even been on Smoky Mountain when I met Canyon. That's wrong. I'd been on something called South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, which was my first TV. It was somebody was trying to recreate the Mid-Atlantic wrestling territory, and they did the same. They had little TV. It was one of the last territories, but it didn't last long. So I did TV for there once before Smoky Mountain. Anyway, to get back to speed, I'd met Canyon, and I was helping him. Oddly enough, he didn't know how to lock up. Now, I don't know how to wrestle, but you know, he didn't even know how to lock up properly. But he'd done some outlaw, you know, street wrestling or something in Brooklyn or wherever he grew up, Queens. And I looked at it and I critiqued it, and I had hooked him up with Moolah, right? And there's a whole pile of funny stories about that too, because he, you know, when everybody's green and pretending they're not green, you know, it's just different levels. And we're sitting there trying to work the fabulous Moolah, who's been in 50 years, you know, at this point. But I guess, you know, he wound up, he went out and started, and he had a really good job making, like, they paid him like 80 grand a year and paid every expense he had: food, clothing, housing, car. So he had 80 grand clear. So he just went on, he saved his money and he went on the road, did the Memphis thing. He did ECW as a job guy. And somehow he got into WCW through persistence as a jobber. Well, Eric Bischoff at this point decides that video games are the way of the future. That's so I get perceptive at that point. But he said he came up with this whole blood runs cold thing with Glacier. And so Canyon, who'd been a utility job guy, was to have the Mortis spot. Well, the problem they had was none of these guys could talk, including Brian Clark at that time, who was Adam Bomb. He was supposed to be the money shot, but the minute he opened his mouth, they said and he was trying to be Sid Vicious, basically. Yeah. And he's a great guy, and he eventually learned to talk, I think. But you know, at one point I remember they told him, "Don't open your mouth again. You sound like you're from Tallahassee," you know. Anyway, so they needed a manager. And Dallas Page had been assigned basically as their babysitter. You know what I mean? So we were all Page's bag boys. You know, we drove him to the airport, picked his wife. You know, that was our job, like the Japanese boys are, you know, when you go to Japan. So we're at his beck and call, and he was there to keep us in line and show us the ropes. But I was sitting, Canyon invited me, and I'd been pestering him since the days he was a jobber to get me in some way. And Canyon, of course, not knowing the ropes, I'm sure, was stupid enough to go to Kevin Sullivan or whoever it was and go, I've got a friend who's a manager. He wants a job. He wants a job, you know? So I probably already had heat for that, you know?
Right.
So, but again, I don't understand these things at this point. I went to visit Canyon one night, and we were sitting there. Probably Disco might have been there. I don't know. We were all sitting around getting liquored up, and Dallas Page calls at like 1 a.m. And we've been drinking all night and watching wrestling tapes. Like, you know that wrestling manager buddy of yours? Bring it to my house tomorrow. We need a mouthpiece for you guys. Because I guess I don't remember precisely. They'd maybe offered it to what's his name, Humperdinck or Gary Hart, as I recall, like those guys said, we're not getting involved in that. That's corny and stupid. So, as has been the story of my life, I stepped up to the plate and I went over to Page's house. I showed him my tape. Page looked at it. He says, "Bro, that sucks." And he goes, Page now, you worked with Dallas, right? You know,
Yep.
Because as he's doing this, he's got, you know, he had all his personal assistants back then, right? So he's got the cook in the kitchen, and he's got a personal assistant doing the spiral weave and the foil in his hair and all that, while he's sitting in a chair, probably getting a pedicure and dictating to me how to do this promo. And somebody's sitting there filming. No, do it again, bro. So he was the guy I would actually credit with the slow, creepy thing, because I was being a fast-talking, whatever, Carolina manager.
Right.
He's like, no, bro, you've got to be slow and evil. And when you say you've opened Pandora's box, bro, you don't just say, I opened Pandora's box. You go, I have opened Pandora's, I'm trying to get in frame here, box. You know, dramatically open the box, you know? So that's what I did. And it was absolutely, I mean, the gimmick was a flop. We all know that. But I got out there, and everybody was a cool heel by this point. You know, it was NWO. That was, and Bischoff, when Bischoff hired me, he said, don't buy a house, don't get married. Tag teams are dead. Managers are dead. We dropped the ball on this thing 6 months ago. We've got so much money invested, but it's not really going to fly. So don't get too set on a paycheck here.
Right.
I got 3 years out of it. But so he's already told me I'm doomed for failure. And I don't think Sullivan, I don't know if Sullivan, see, when you're in that little bubble with your friends and you're an underneath guy, you don't really know. You know, you hear what you overhear from Dallas in the car rides, but that's totally, you know what I mean? There's huge separations in the food chain.
Right.
So our belief at the time was that Kevin Sullivan hated us. I'm pretty sure Kevin Sullivan did not even think about us. We did not matter. He had his egos. We were the last thing on his mind. We were the pains in the ass calling him and asking him stupid questions, you know. But we went out there, and everybody was a cool heel. You know, everything's changing. And I was, you know, now doing this thing Paige had shown me where I'm very slow and evil and deliberate, which was like something from another planet. Right. Totally out of place. Totally not being a normal guy talking. I'm James Bond villain and pleasure you shall. There's some new shit Dallas Page just taught me to do. Right. He was like, be Jake Roberts. Think Jake Roberts. You know. And I'm like, okay, I'll do this. You know, whatever. And you know, it was a nice mid-card featured spot, but it was just crap. It was basically built around Glacier, but it was a great learning experience because, first of all, it's the first time I got real money. Mm-hmm. I wasn't living on people's couches or shacking up with ugly girls who had a good job. I could go out and buy a car, and you know what I mean? Yep, so yep. That was the first time in my life since I told you earlier in the audio where I quit high school and, you know, was half homeless half the time. Not living on the streets, but always on a couch somewhere, flopping somewhere for years. It enabled me to be a responsible human being, to have some good money. It enabled me, and I saw within 3 months how much I didn't know about wrestling when I got around real people. You know what I mean? Right. Everything I knew was wrong. It was all wrong. And I at the time, I was glad there was no YouTube because, and now that stuff comes back to haunt you. Yeah, I was horrible. I was horrible. And I will actually say, that's the reason I always say I never begrudge anybody having a spot, because if they're going to give it to you and they're going to pay you, who am I to say you shouldn't have it, right? And the same thing happened to me. I got kind of grandfathered in because he took that tape to Bischoff. Now, at the time, Bischoff said he thought I was great or liked it, whatever. It got me the job. But I wasn't ready. I didn't, I didn't deserve that spot. I wasn't there.
After that angle, did they more or less send you home? Did you get paid for the last 2 years and not work?
Yeah. Yeah.
See, this is what I find. This is what I really find hard to believe. And maybe you can explain this, okay? Outside of the Carolinas and Virginia and then, Smoky Mountain, this is like your real first job, so to speak. You're getting paid good money, Okay, the gimmick doesn't really work. Okay, no problem. But this is where, I just get a little bit confused because, if I'm sitting in Eric Bischoff's seat at that time, you've got to look, bro. You've got.
Well, I didn't have that look at the time, no, bro. But I looked like Todd Gordon at the time,
But you were still. Let me put it this way: you were still different.
I was different. Yes.
You were still different. You obviously had a personality.
Yes, I had. Without talking, I will say this: without opening my mouth, because I think I cut 3 promos the whole time I was there. Without opening my mouth, you could have been a guy in the jungles of Papua New Guinea and gotten what I was about when I walked down the ramp.
Yes, you know what I mean? And that's what I don't understand. Why would a decision be made to just send this guy home and pay him rather than put an effort into maybe we can do something with him?
Well, they at one point I pitched doing it was a segment. It was, I don't know, it lasted 4 or 5 weeks, called the Auditorium, where I would do like a rant or something for 2 or 3 minutes. And again, I was doing it in character. So that was a tactical error on my part anyway. But they put it on the Saturday show, which they didn't care about anyway, Yeah. Nitro was the deal. And I think Jimmy Hart or somebody was in charge. They just wanted some content. But and I mean, like that stuff surfaces on YouTube and I don't want to see it. I get in a fetal position. But at the time, I thought that was the thing to do and what would get me over. And I didn't. Again, I was, just as wrestling is on the cusp of changing, I've been handed a character that is so completely 180 degrees away from what wrestling is becoming, that I'm trying to get a talk show off the ground speaking like Bela Lugosi.
Right.
So it didn't work. And I think they were going to bring me back once or twice. But I mean, basically what Paige was, bro, shut up. Don't let them know you're alive. They'll keep renewing your contract. Yeah. He goes, you know what? At this point, bro, the most important thing for you to do is get a paycheck. Don't worry about angles. So that's what they did until I think Bischoff got let go, I believe, right? Before you came, 99, late 99.
Yeah.
And then Bill Bush or somebody got involved and said, we've been paying this guy this much money for the last 2 years. So, that 6-figure vacation went to hell.
So now how did we connect the line to ECW?
Now, ECW, again, another example. Like ECW, I watched it when I was on Smoky Mountain because they were on the same. We had to go to a friend who had a satellite dish or something to watch it. But ECW and Smoky Mountain came on some kind of sports channel back in '93. So it was kind of cool then. But then it evolved into something that was pretty much completely against, again, my personal wet dream of Gary Hart. Dusty fighting Gary Hart's army, right?
Right.
Because it had things that I was never a fan of, women in wrestling. I have friends who I was sort of dumping on, but it just wasn't my thing. It just didn't work for me. There were women all over the place, prominently featured, rolling around. There were no rules. So as a manager, I could, whatever I had learned, I had to throw out the window. I mean, this was just me watching it before I went there. I was like, this is bizarro land. It's wrestling in reverse, right? So but I'm still sitting at home with no job for a few months. I read, I don't know if it was on the internet or in the Torch, somebody floated a rumor that I was going to manage Mike Awesome. So I tried to call Heyman. He didn't call me back. Raven called me and he said, you need to go on the road. I said, Raven, I can't afford to go follow you guys around like a Grateful Dead guy, a rat or something. They goes, no, Vandy, you got to do it. You got to do it. And so I did. And I started every week, I'm spending $200 to $500 a week on a ticket, basically to carry Raven's bags. That's probably why he really want, right? I had to drive the car so he could complain about how badly I drove. I get beaten up. So that's pretty much what happened. So that went on for a couple months. And I mean, Heyman basically wasn't paying me any attention, but it was more about becoming friends with people, seeing if you fit in.
Yeah.
And again, with Raven probably still just carrying his bags. So I showed up one trip, and I'm trying to get Heyman to notice me. So at this point, I'd already started kind of growing the devil goatee and stuff. But I mean, I was still very much a work in progress. Hadn't even really begun to get out of hand. So I had my James Vandenberg suit on, just all black, but I bought a clerical shirt and put a color in it. So figuring it would be some kind of rib. We were at a restaurant one morning, like 7 o'clock in the morning, that happened to serve wine. So I figured, won't it be funny to be the drunken priest? So as we're sitting in breakfast, me and Raven and whoever else was there at the time, I don't remember, I ordered and drank like 3 or 4 bottles of wine at like 7 in the morning. And the point was to make it obvious to people around, like, what's this cleric is here hammered, before breakfast. And the woman, the waitress walked over and asked something like, Father, are you all right? And Raven goes, hey, Padre, don't you think it's a little early to be hitting the hooch? So we went back, and that story got relayed to Paul, who popped for it. So he came up with a very primitive idea. I think he said, Melvin K. Horn, like I was going to be a Billy Swagger. Was that his name? Just Jimmy Swagger. Yeah. I thought maybe we were going to go the evangelism shyster route. And so it still wasn't formed. So now I'm still coming around for maybe another month, and nothing's happening. I haven't gotten dime one. So I got to looking at the TV. I mean, looking on the internet and looking around my office and looking at the little action figures. And what I told you in the audio earlier, I looked at all the stuff I liked that was sitting, just like the stuff in your office behind you in the video. I have some devils over here, some jokers over here, some Richard Pryor over here. And I went and basically had the prototype version of the Sinister Minister, and had the red suit, had the red collar this time. And I got nails done, like werewolf. What do you call them? Whatever women get done at the Vietnamese nail salons. And I walked in, and everybody popped. And that came from Raven too, because Raven sat me down that weekend or two before, maybe it was 2 weeks came back. He said, Vandy, here's the deal. He goes, Vandy, you're one of the best promo guys. He goes, a promo guy, even right now, nobody knows who you are. You're an 8 on a scale of 10. And he goes, but people got to notice you in an airport. And he goes, look, you look like Todd Gordon. He goes, you're a fat, bald guy with a beard and a ponytail. And he goes, you got to do something to make people notice you, so that when they walk by you, they're going to go, who's that guy? And what do you do for a living? So I sat and meditated on that, and that became the Sinister Minister. And for the first, and look, like that, and ECW is such a blur for a million reasons, you can probably imagine, as I indoctrinated myself into the ECW lifestyle. But and I became a babyface, doing no effort of my own. That was the first time in my life I felt like a star, because people, I mean, still, ECW is getting a 1.2, which in those days, a 1.2 is probably like what, a 0.03 now. I don't know. Like, but that was a decent number for TNN or what TNT, whatever channel they were on at the time. And that's where, that was just part of the whole process. Suddenly, I didn't wear a red suit in public every day, but I always wore something kind of devilish, like Hot Topic-y or obnoxious boots. And that's where I learned to carry myself like a star, not arrogant, not rude, but people got into car wrecks looking at me at stoplights. I mean, I learned through hook and crook how to work your gimmick. And I did it 24/7, and I don't mean I cackled at people, because to me, I always believed the best way to do the devilish thing, and we can get into some of this later with TNA stuff when they used to make me say I was evil, which an evil person wouldn't do, but was to be charming, right? Be charming, but walk in looking the way I look. And it threw people off, So ECW, what did it last with me there? A year and a half, maybe? And he paid me great, too. I had to do TV and pay-per-views. I was making more money than most of the guys. Not the top-tier guys, not Van Dam money. But I was right at six figures, for 2 days' work. So it was great. And he treated me like a star. And now in that bubble of ECW, too, see, like you get in that bubble and think everything you do is great. And basically me and Mikey Whipwreck drunkenly stumbled into a formula, which happened by accident the first time, and then it became the formula. Find a punchline first, a visual gag or something, make up a joke about it and work backwards from there. And that's your promo. And it always ends. And I mean, it made no sense. Like I watch that stuff now and I'm like, what the hell was that? But ECW fans did drink that Kool-Aid. So that Heyman did. They were rabid. And when they decided they liked us, we did some horrible, just horrible, roll your eyes stuff. But to them, it was golden. And you know what? That's all that mattered.
Why was that?
We're selling tickets for.
Why was that, though? Why were they rabid over that?
Paul, first of all, you're in Philly, which is the beginning of it, and you know how Philly people are. Okay, they're rabid. They're a different crowd. That's the only crowd where I got mad at a crowd for what they said to me. I mean, they're hardcore, and I think Paul was smart enough to realize that at that point that there was a certain segment, a lot of whom were in Philly, who were becoming wise to the kayfabe sheets or the dirt sheets or whatever we called them in the early 90s, who didn't want to be insulted. They at least wanted to be winked at. You know what I mean? So you would get Paul break. You know what he did? Here's exactly what he did. If you remember Stan Lee with Marvel Comics and Forrest Ackerman with Famous Monsters of Filmland, you know what he did? He didn't talk to the audience, he talked to them. You remember you'd be reading a Spider-Man comic book and there would be an editor's note and it would say, hey, true believers, be sure to look at issue 129 to see what he's talking about. Smiling Stan. Forrest Ackerman did that same thing. He made you feel not like you were some dude who bought a ticket and shut up. It was the same psychology. He brought, and he would swerve them all the time. Make them think they were seeing something or getting some information they didn't. But it was enough, he threw enough bait out there. There was a certain kind of fan that needed that. You know what? They weren't being catered to by WWE when they had the gobbledygooker and the gooner or the garbage man, when they were in that phase. And WCW was sucking for various reasons. Pretty much sucked from the time Ted Turner bought it until maybe a year and a year and a half, 80 weeks, year and a half, maybe 2 weeks, and then it died. And but anyway, and we'll get on that in a bit too. I'll just say it now. Had you not gone to WCW, who would have been considered the person who killed it?
It's a good question. I don't know. Who?
Right. Well, I'm not going to get twittered by somebody a lot more famous than me, but there are about two names that killed it. Ultimately, I mean, and what I'm saying is maybe it didn't come because corporately what a mess it was.
Right.
They didn't care bastard stepchild. But ultimately, had you not been there, somebody else was there, and they would have. I looked at your situation, and I've told you before. You brought. They were doing sports entertainment. You brought Uber sports entertainment in, and it was a drastic change. And at the time, I looked at it, I was like, "What the hell is this? It's crazy." But I was also busy with ECW at the time, so I wasn't really watching the product. All I was getting was. I knew there were a lot of things on poles. It seemed to be what I was reading at the time. A lot of pole matches, but ultimately, that ship. It's like being a president and taking on the economy. You know, the deficit that you walked into. That's the position you were in, and the company would have probably died 6 months sooner had you not gotten there. They didn't want it. They didn't like it, and so I got off topic there. But
Jim, let me ask you this, because you're the first DCW guy I've had on here, and I want to ask you this question from being on the inside of ECW. I get accused a lot, and Jim, I'm shooting totally straight with you, and I've had nothing but praise for Paul Heyman throughout my career, But I constantly get accused of, the Attitude Era ripped off ECW, and the fact of the matter is, as a shoot, I mean, I probably saw a handful of ECW shows. I wasn't watching ECW because I was busy writing our wrestling show. But when I did watch ECW, I was a fan of ECW. I was a fan of the characters, guys like Al Snow and the Dudleys and stuff like that. But here's the thing, bro, that mesmerized me when it came to ECW and made me look at Paul Lee differently. And I want to ask you the answer to this question. Okay. When I would watch that product, Jim, my intrigue of that product was, tonight I am going to literally witness somebody breaking their neck. The way everybody in that company put their bodies and their livelihoods, on the line. I mean, the risk taking and, was just like off the charts to me. And to me, like, I always put that credit on Paul Lee, because at the end of the day, I always felt like these guys are willing to maybe end their career on something they're doing in the ring because they believe so much in this guy that they're willing to wind up in a wheelchair to make it work. Am I that far off base there? What was the mentality?
Yeah. I'm telling you, he's the best motivator I ever met in my life. For wrestling purposes, he could make you believe, and that's part of the thing, instead of walking through the curtain and some guy going, yeah, I gotta take a number and be seated. I gotta worry about this.
I got to ask you this because I'm going to get hammered for this, but I got to ask it anyway. I'm conducting the interview. When you say motivator, okay, I mean, I don't think he obviously was motivating through money because, there's a history of guys not getting, I mean, there's all that history. When you say motivation, I got to ask you this, Jim, from your point of view. Did Paul Lee actually believe it all himself, or was it part of him working? Like you said, he knew how he had to come across to the fans. He told them what he wanted to tell them, but meanwhile, he worked them into thinking they were part of the family. Right. Was it that way with the talent, or did Paul Lee believe we're going to be bigger than the WWE?
No, he worked the talent. Of course, he worked the talent.
But how? Yeah. But let me ask you this. Jim.
And I mean that in the best way.
Yeah, you mean it in the best way, but we also know, bro, the talent aren't the easiest people to work.
No,
was he that good?
Yes, he was that good. I heard him one time in I was driving in a car with him, and I forget who it was. But I went back and pretend to be passed out drunk and listen to people talk. And that's when you'd get the best wisdom. And I heard him, maybe he was it doesn't matter who he was in the car with, but he described running that company like being in charge of a room full of 300-pound, 300-pound 12-year-olds or 8-year-olds or something like that with knives. I forget, but something like that. But that he was having to work this delicate balance of, running a daycare for a bunch of emotionally stunted, violent, volatile people, and he did it, and there was an art to it. Nobody ever beat Paul Heyman up, to my knowledge. I heard a lot of people threaten to do it, and when it came time to do it, they never did. And
Well,
he
Jim,
he always knew the magic thing to say. He was
Jim,
that good.
Jim, you know what's amazing to me? And he was that good because, Jim, if you still know ECW guys to this day, I'm talking about, Dreamer and Taz and Bubba and those guys to this day, it's still that ECW hype that it's like I sit back, and again, I never had the opportunity to work with Paul a lot. We've had some conversations. That's about it. But I'm just fascinated by the way this guy did it. It's unbelievable to me.
He was a natural, and if you watch that DVD that they just put out where he's like telling his story as a kid, this is a guy 14 years old BS'd his way backstage in Madison Square Garden through VKM Senior. You didn't do that.
Right.
He
right.
did, and became friends and driving buddies with the wise men of the East.
Right.
Okay. That's something. I don't, at that point you would think the die is cast. He's that good. And has Paul been known to bend the truth? Absolutely. Paul's been known, but you know what? It's one of those things where the ends justify the means. And, people complained about, they didn't get paid all this money. Well, I don't know what so I think I didn't get paid 3 or 4 checks over the time. And he was paying me so much for so little, I didn't mind,
Yeah.
And for what he did to my self-esteem, which had been shattered at that point, before going there, I would have given him 10 or 12 checks. You know what I mean?
That's
great. But he's good. He's what a lot of people want to be. And he's got a lot of Vince McMahon in him. I'm assuming Vince McMahon is the same kind of guy. Yeah. Maybe.
Hey, Jim, let me ask you this question because you hit upon this earlier and it's interesting. Do you think that company would have been, as successful? By successful, of course, I'm not looking at the monetary model. I'm talking about the fans that still talk about it this day. Do you think that company would have been as successful outside of Philadelphia?
I don't know. Because obviously we went other places, and we went places where I watched some enormous merchandise fly off fly off the shelves. In Canada, they didn't have enough trucks to bring the merch in. And here's what, again, when all these little startup companies talk about branding, well, you know what? Nobody talked about that before Heyman did it. Heyman was the first guy I remember using the term branding. So now you have every indie guy, my brand. You're not a brand. Right. You know what I mean? Coca-Cola is a brand.
Right.
Okay. Budweiser is a brand. You're a guy on YouTube. You're not a brand. You have to have something that, that's unique and tangible. They created, I remember seeing ECW shirts for sale in department stores, like the kind of stuff, places your grandmother shops. Mm-hmm. And they were right there next to the Goldberg t-shirts. So they made their mark. I would certainly, I would imagine companies like Ring of Honor probably tried to somewhat follow that format, but they haven't gotten there. They haven't gotten close. He created something. It was underground. But the Sex Pistols were underground too. Mm-hmm. And their fumes reverberate to this day. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was just low key enough to, to have this ongoing, and then suddenly everything. I don't recall anything being extreme before ECW existed. Did you ever see any shows called Extreme Sports or Extreme Canoeing? I don't know. Maybe it was there, but
You know
he
what
brought that into the consciousness.
Jim, you know what it is? Here's what it is, and here's what the staying power is. And I say this about myself all the time because, it's 23 years in the wrestling business. When I get just as emotional now as I do back then. The one word I always use, Jim, and I think it's the reason why I still do this. It's the reason why you're who you are, Paul Heyman. To me, it all comes down to emotion. It really all comes down to emotion. And if you don't have that emotion inside of you, they're going to forget your name tomorrow. And like I said, when I look at Paul Heyman and not knowing him, very well personally, his emotion, you can't, I don't know if you can match anybody up to him, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. He's good. He's great.
Now, Jim, let me ask you this. Before we get to TNA, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, when WWE did their thing and they were kicking off their version of ECW, was there a time when you were going to go work for them and be a part of that ECW brand prior to TNA?
They never offered. Okay, nobody from the office offered me anything. The boys called me, and they'd already started at this point. The boys would call me, and I'll basically do that. We're going to get the band back together thing, all the pirates and outlaws, late night outlaws. Oh, devil, you got to get, man, I've talked to someone. It was a bunch of chatter, and it got to the point where when I was at TNA, because they started after I was already at TNA, the relaunch of ECW, right. But to the point to where somehow, and I even told them I had just signed a contract. And I said, boys, I'd love to, but it's too late, So I forget who it was. It doesn't matter. I don't want anybody in trouble. But people were calling me going, oh, I've talked to this guy, and they're going to bring you in if you'll sign. And I said, I'm sorry. I just signed a 2-year or 3-year, whatever it was, deal. And if you'd called me earlier, I would have been there. But see, this is 3 o'clock in the morning stuff. Yeah. I got contacted for real by WWE and much later, a couple years ago, but it was a different deal. So no, I was never on slate to be a part of it.
Jim, let me ask you this question because there's very few people that can answer this. You're one of them that can. You leave ECW, you leave that phenomenon. You know all about that. Now you come into the very early stages of NWA/TNA, which was a very, very, very different company than the TNA you see on TV today. I mean, you first come up with the Disciples of the New Church, which was Slash and Brian Lee, and then the Gathering, CM Punk.
Slash in the Wall. Slash in the Wall, Jerry Toot, Malice.
Okay.
Jerry Toot. Right.
Wasn't Slash a part of that too as well?
Yes, it was him and the Wall first. Jerry Toot.
Okay.
Called Malice. He was in the first main event against Shamrock. And then they added, but we'll go into that later. But yes, so I come in with that.
So and then the Gathering, CM Punk and Julio De Niro, very, very early in their career. I got to say this, man, about Raven. Guys that Raven pushed back then that even I would look at and say, are you sure? Raven never missed. I mean, from CM Punk, to you, to Mickey James, even this Julio De Niro, Raven had a phenomenal eye for talent. But my question is, coming from ECW now to this new NWA TNA, were there a lot of similarities? Were there major differences? Where did you think this company was going to go in its early stages?
First, Jeff Jarrett called me up and asked me if I wanted to manage Lenny and Lodi and be some kind of gay character. And I said, well, you know what? I don't have a problem with gay characters, being that my best friend is as gay as the day is long. But I said, I don't think I can pull that off convincingly. So I turned it down, and like a week later, I get a call, with this whole new church thing. And I said, yeah, I'll give it a shot. But my take going into TNA at the time was I'm just going to get a chance to go hang out and party with the boys that I haven't seen in a year. That's what I was looking at was, because the boys, I don't do indies. I won't do them. You know what I mean? So I never got to see the guys. So that was my excuse to get a paid trip to hang out with my friends. Um, I got there in the first 2 or 3 weeks they did it. Now, were you always there from the beginning? Always?
I was there at the second show. The only show I didn't work was
Show.
the first one. Yeah.
Okay. So I got there at the first show, and it was like the whole damn WCW production crew was there. A lot of faces, Keith Mitchell and all those guys. And, it was a big setup in that arena. It looked like a good TV taping. So I thought, wow, this is going to be neat. But my initial take on it was there was a lot of sports entertainment, which we'll call things that don't involve rolling around in the mat in your underoos. A lot of midgets masturbating in garbage cans and stuff like that. That they were throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, and I also thought, and this is going to piss a lot of people off, especially from that neck of the woods. There was much Memphis, too much country corn pone. Now, to me, I love Jerry Jarrett as a guy. I acknowledge that he was a great, he did everything he did. Memphis worked. It worked, and it did exactly. The business model worked. But to me, and see, I didn't get to grow up and watch it. If I saw anything, it was a tape of the top guys.
Yeah.
But man, that was a 2 or 3 hour show.
Or Randy Kaufman.
Yes, saw a lot of that.
Okay.
Well, when I went back once I got into business, afford to buy tapes and stuff and study, a lot of it looked to me. I mean, and again, this is where you tell somebody there's no Santa Claus is going to piss everybody off. I thought it just most of it looked like a bad indie show. Like, it's like me with no shirt on in the ring wrestling. Nobody wants to see that. But in Memphis, it worked. But I thought the first several shows they did was a weird mix between WWE and Hee Haw. It was like. It just, and I don't know. I don't think any of that country stuff got over with the mainstream audience at all. I don't think NASCAR drivers mattered. I don't think country music Toby Keith was enormous. That didn't do anything to pop a rating, nor did anything they ever did anytime they ever brought in a celebrity.
Jim, I say this, and it gets me in so much trouble that I stopped saying it. But if you're going to put something on your TV, it better get over in New York, in Chicago, and LA, or you're dead. And Jim, again, that's fact, bro. That's not Vince Russo's opinion. That's not Jim Mitchell's opinion. That is fact. But when you say it, it's like what you said. That's fact. Those are your big cities. If you don't get over with them, you're not over. Period.
Right.
And you know how difficult it was with me, Jim, to be working with Jeff and try to say that in a nice way. I'm not saying it because I'm prejudiced against these people. I'm saying it because in LA and Chicago and New York, people are laughing. I'm sorry, they're laughing.
So you and Jeff were at odds often.
Oh, Jim, he used to get so pissed off at me because I was stating a fact. You want to know what New York is? New York is ECW. That's what New York is. You're putting this product with Jeff and AJ and Road Dogg, and I'll go on and on and on. And it's not playing to the big parts of the country. Bro, he used to get so hot at me, but it was a fact.
Well, here's something. Look, again, and I understand everybody's wrestling that you grow up on is like the church you went to.
Yes,
it's your high school football team. And if somebody dumps on that, if somebody told me Mid-Atlantic, see, I had the fortune of seeing Mid-Atlantic wrestling, Georgia wrestling, Florida wrestling, and Madison Square Garden wrestling in the 70s due to the way the cable was.
Yep.
So I got some good stuff. I don't have any attachment to AWA. I don't have any attachment to what happened in California. I don't have any attachment to what happened in Memphis, right? So, but, if somebody were to dump on Johnny Valentine and Blackjack Mulligan, it'd upset me. So this is where I know I'm going to probably ruffle some feathers here. But I remember when they spent a lot of time on those early shows with guys who clearly, and I've done my history, I've done my research and vetting, Jackie Fargo was a phenomenon, a rock star, like bigger than Elvis in Memphis. Gypsy Joe was something, but they would trot out these guys, I guess, to get a pop for Nashville. So yeah, the people in Nashville are gonna, yeah, Jackie Fargo, Gypsy Joe, or the, who was the woman who used to work, you know,
I know exactly.
the woman, she worked the concession stand, and they trot her out. They're all great people. I'm not saying, but you're talking about a TV show, and you're bringing out old. It's not like you're bringing out Dusty Rhodes, okay? You know, who transcended that kind of thing. So it only played to that small market. And I would sit there and go, what the hell is, you know, and people would watch it. I mean, again, I think I remember reading an interview with Jerry Jarrett, and I love Jerry Jarrett. I have nothing but the utmost respect to him. He's always been a gentleman to me, and I respect him and love him. But that doesn't mean I agree with every idea he ever had, or most anybody's ideas. I remember reading an interview with him from like 1991 where he said that he and Jerry Lawler went to a network and pitched wrestling as done by Hee Haw, right? Mm-hmm. Hee Haw was syndicated, and I grew up, I saw Hee Haw when I was a kid. I don't know if you did, but you know, it was like watching the Beverly Hillbillies. What's this crazy
Jim, wait,
stuff? But it doesn't play on a national.
First of all, Jim, wait a minute. If we were on the East Coast and we watched Hee Haw, which I did, why did we watch Hee Haw?
To make fun of how retarded they were.
But not only that, there was one huge draw, Jim. Let's face it. Remember
the girls.
Oh my God! Remember, I could tell you right now. Remember Bobby Benton?
Yeah. The girl that when the guys were singing, their songs, and you had the girls.
Are you kidding me?
Girls.
That was the gimmick. You know, I mean, there was no question about it. But yeah, I mean, Jim, I'd sit in creative meetings where, you know, they were talking about like Hermie Sadler being a big deal, and I'm like, first of all, he's the brother of a famous NASCAR driver. He's not even NASCAR.
Oh, he's not the driver?
No, and then Jim, no, he's a driver, but his brother, Elliott Sadler, is the famous racer. This is the little brother. And then, Jim, I used to sit in these meetings, bro, seriously. They used to talk about tarring and feathering people. It was 2000, Jim. And
antebellum South.
Bro, they would get so hot at me. But anyway, let's move on with TNA. Now, did you see a transition from that stage to more mainstream? When did you see that, and why do you think it came?
Probably when I got to Spike. I think when they, you know, Dixie came in and saved it or whatever, because they went through that atrocious period when they didn't have any money for a few weeks before Dixie came, and that looked bad. You know, when you could see the insulation up in the top of the that was bad. But I don't think they had a vision for a long time. It was, let's just throw everything on the wall and see what sticks, and they would. And basically, if somebody chanted your name, they went with you, right? Which kind of works. But then it was like, you know, anyway, it was very inconsistent. There were things that were great and there were things that were horrible because, as I say over and over again, there were people put in positions of on-air talent that had no business being on-air talent. Or no, you could be on air, but if you're going to do this, if the red light comes on and you're expected to open your mouth, you should be able to deliver. And if you can't, you might be a nice guy. And maybe you don't have to buy a ticket. Maybe you can be an enhancement guy or help, but you have no business opening your mouth and telling a story on TV if you can't. And I think, like I said before, they got the best star talent they could get. Then they had to get the best indie talent. Well, indie talent doesn't know how to get over on TV because they've never been on TV. So that was a problem with a lot of, and it didn't matter who was writing it, you or anybody else. You know, Shakespeare or Martin Scorsese. And again, I don't want to name names, but you can give him some of the guys that they had who cut great flips. They couldn't cut great promos, and he can't make them a star, you know? Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of ideas that probably, if they had more talent, I hate to sound, but if they had guys who know how to get over, maybe that's the term, not talent, guys who know how to get over, that would have gone differently. So say that when I first really saw them start establishing a pretty consistent deal. Might have been when maybe they went to Fox or something, or right, or maybe at Spike, because when I was gone, they kept firing me. Well, not firing me, but failing to use me. And I want to ask you about that in a bit. They probably around Spike, to get back to to answer your question. Probably when I hit Spike is when I started seeing a pretty cohesive, uh, something resembling a brand. There was sports entertainment, there was women, there was enough wrestling and flipping to do this. But by that point, they also had some guys who were put in key positions and in enough segments to carry the dramatic stuff properly. So that I would say probably a little bit before Spike maybe is when I saw them establish a real identity, and to where you could say this is an alternative to WWE. Maybe I think it's been a long time.
Do you think, Jim, that you started coming into your own and started doing some of the best work in your career when you were put with Abyss? Is Absolutely. That when you? Okay.
Here's the thing. I will never. I'm under no delusions that I could be ever called great, because that involves having had the opportunity to do greatness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was. By the time I got started in wrestling, women were the thing. There were no managers. So anyway, but I always thought I was talented, and I've heard this from consistently, without name dropping. You should have been a bigger deal, but that's fine. But I'm never going to be recognized, probably for what I am, because unless Vince buys TNA tape library, all Vince has access to is drunken shenanigans with the Sinister Minister and Mikey Whipwreck at 4 a.m. and a bad blood runs cold Mortal Kombat angle, right? Mm-hmm. So nobody really see that. So I came into my own with Raven. And I'll be honest with you, Vince, I was taking TNA, up and down because they would piss me off. I would get over, and this has been a consistent thing, and you're here, so I'm going to ask you, maybe you have some insight on this. My memory is anytime, all the mainstream reviews, even when I wasn't even given a damn in the early days of TNA, I was usually pretty well reviewed up there. But when I started the Raven thing, now I had personal issues with Raven, and it's just like the clouds parted, the light came down. That's when I became who I was. You know what I mean? It clicked, and I didn't feel like I was faking it. And it was like maybe what a method actor does. I don't know, but I really did feel Vince. And to this day, I'm not the Sinister Minister or Father James Mitchell as I'm talking to you. But if I put on that red suit for 5 minutes, it's like Clark Kent and Superman or Peter Parker. It's like I have wondered if I either I accidentally stumbled onto method acting or something went wrong in my head and I created a fully functioning personality, because I called him the gentleman in the red suit, who is a lot better spoken, intelligent, and self-possessed than I am. You know what I mean? And so that happened in TNA. So the stuff I'm proudest of was in TNA, which is what my frustration is with them, because every time I got hot, Vince, and you can track it, like, you like to talk about numbers, track when they took me off TV. I'm over, and I've got heat, and I'm hot, and then they send me home. Like for a long time. Then they bring me back, I build it back up, and they pull me off again. I never understood that. Can you give me some insight? Yeah. Because that leads to conspiracy thing. Like, are you getting too hot and they want to send you home, or do you can't afford to pay you, or
I'll tell you what it is from my perspective and where I was sitting. Okay. Right. Now, first of all, let me say this. There were a couple of issues happening. Let me say this.
Yeah.
I think, me personally, I think when you have a talent, okay, whether they own the company or not, when you have a talent involved in creative,
right?
I don't care who it is, it's the worst thing that you can possibly do. And let me tell you the number one reason why, Jim. Talent is going to have some personal issues with the other talent. Okay? A writer isn't. A
Right.
writer is going to look at all the talent on an even playing field. There's going to, if you're a wrestler, there's going to be baggage and stories with the other talent. That is going to affect you in your creative. Okay?
Yeah.
Jeff Jarrett hated Raven with a passion. Did not like Raven. And you know what, Jim? It probably comes a lot down to what you said. The wrestler and the territory that Jeff represented, and the wrestler and the territory that Raven represented. So there was probably on Jeff's part a huge misunderstanding of Raven. And Raven knew Jeff hated him, okay? Yeah. So right there, if you're involved with Raven, that's going to affect you.
Right.
Here's number two. And, you know, part of me gives Jeff credit for this, and the other part is you're an idiot to think that was ever going to work. What Jeff tried to do was he had his booking from the South. He was involved in it. Dutch Mantel was involved in it. Jim Cornette was involved in it, okay? And his father in the early days of TNA.
Sure.
Meanwhile, he had Russo, who was from New York, from the Attitude Era, from a completely different planet. Jeff's thinking was, I'm going to bring these two worlds together and get the best of both. No, you're not. That's not going to happen.
You have to pick one.
The best that's going to happen, Jim, the best that's going to happen is there's going to be a compromise and your product is going to suffer. Vince McMahon always used to say, you can't be half pregnant. You either go all the way with something or don't even do it. So, Jim, what would happen in my case? And Jim, this wasn't just, Jeff and Dutch and Cornette. This was later with Eric Bischoff. What happens, bro, is when you're put in a committee situation and you have people with, like you said, different wrestling backgrounds, it comes to a point, Jim, where it's like, okay, I got one or two choices. I'm either going to sit here and argue with them all day, which is going to create bad blood, which is going to carry on, or I'm just going to wave the white flag. And a lot of times, Jim, you wave the white flag because it's the structure of the creative. So what happens is, you have a team of Raven and Jim Mitchell. Well, if Vince Russo is a big Raven and Jim Mitchell fan and other members of the committee aren't, before you could do anything with Jim Mitchell and Raven, you've got to convince everybody else.
Right.
And Jim, you got to understand, this is wrestling. We all think we're right. We all think we know everything. So you spend some time trying to convince them, but then you get to the point where the white flag comes out, you wave it, and it's over. And Jim, let's face it, bro. Let's call a spade, especially when we were working with Jeff and you're talking about that Southern mentality in wrestling. Jim, we were doing a lot of stuff that was over people's heads. Between your promos and the way you spoke and, my writing, bro, our stories were intellectual. They were out there. They included, detail and scenes, and you had to watch every week to get hooked. Bro, if your mind is trained to watch Jackie Fargo, you're not going to understand that.
You're not going to grasp an episode of True Detective.
You're not going to grasp True Detective. So Jim, what happens is, it's like it's a constant battle until you get to the point where, okay, enough already, uncle. But the reason why, you keep coming back and you keep coming back is, okay, name one other person outside of James Mitchell who knows how to get people over. Name one other person on the roster. There is nobody. So you keep coming back, you keep coming back, you keep coming back. But from my perspective and my seat, that had a lot to do with it.
Well, Kurt Angle came up to me right about the time he was finishing up with Joe. And he came to me and he said, I'm scared of the guy. He's Kurt Angle. I'm giving him his space. And he's tying his shoes. Mitchell, I need to talk to you. I'm like, oh, my God, what do? And he said, look, I'm finishing up with Joe. And he said, there's a lot of great talent here. Great. I said, I'm sure I want to have great matches with Low Key or Senshi, whatever we called him. I could have great matches with Low Key. I can have great matches with James Storm. And he went down a list of people. And he said, but Mitchell, the problem is they don't know how to get over. And he goes, when they're wrestling, they're fine. He goes, when the red light comes on, they can't do anything. And he said, I need you to be my Grand Wizard. He goes, I need you to feed me, guys. He goes, you're a star maker. And I'm going, Kurt, I've never been anywhere. And he's going, no, you are. He goes, shut up. I've been to WWE. I'm an Olympic. I know what I'm looking at. You can make guys stars. They just have to let you do it. And he goes down this whole, blows a lot of hat shine up my ass. And he says, do you mind if I go to Dixie and pitch that? And you talk again about a natural high that lasted for 2 days. Olympic gold medalist, multiple-time WWE guy, and next to Sting, the biggest, most iconic name in the company, is now telling me he wants me to be his Blassie, Albano, and Wizard, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes and pitches it, and I go home. They found some reason to send me home for a while. And meanwhile, Abyss is out there doing the same Wile E. Coyote act and slipping on his Acme products every week, that blow up in his face, predictably every single week the same way. So he's getting less over. You know what I mean? That's why I try not to do these interviews, because I'm going to get angry. But they would send me home. And when we did that thing with Sting, and this will be interesting for people. Me and you had not really worked together much. You were there.
Keep in mind too, I want you to know, again, I don't know, bro, I'm 53 years old. I've lost half my mind. I don't know the time frames, but like in 2000 I think it was 2002. I can't even remember. I went home for a couple of years in TNA.
Right.
So there was a big block of time, a couple of years that I was not there. So again, I don't know the timelines of when these things happened, but anyway.
Okay, so the most I had ever worked with you prior to the Sting and Abyss thing was when you did Glory. I was on that first one. Now I'd been out of wrestling again for a year, coming off of the Raven thing, where I will still say even though I'm not a manager, I was one of the hottest heels in wrestling for that run with Raven, where I found myself. And then I'm sitting home for a year. They can't find anything for me to do. You call me, you say, hey, I'm doing this show. And
you just answered the question right there. If I called you that I'm doing this show, that means that I was home the time they sent you home.
Yes, you were home.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, this is going to be a two-part story. So I'm thinking it's a rib. I'm like, what? You want me to be in a church and do all this? So you know what? I'll do it. Hell yeah. And I never got a chance to work with you before. And I remember you sent me a script about as big as a New York phone book. And it was like, wow, there's no way to get through this. So anyhow, I get there. And I believe didn't you have like Sahadi there and Terry Taylor? You had a lot of production people, either from WCW or TNA.
Yeah.
And I got there, and again, now at this point, my self-esteem is destroyed, because I thought I'd done some amazing stuff, and now I'm sitting home doing nothing. We get there, and of course, I didn't read the script, and it was hectic, as you would imagine with that. But first of all, it was a great, how many people were there? 2,000, 1,500?
No, we had a real nice.
It was a huge house.
Yeah.
So it's a Christian-themed wrestling show. I'd never done anything like that before, and I'm going to play the devil. Now, this is kind of awkward. I'm in a church looking like I look. And even some of the boys, like David Cash, Kid Cash, he was pissed off that I was in the church. So anyhow, I remember, whatever. It was typical. It was kind of like an episode of Nitro. There's so much going on that you're just having to grab what you can and make it work. I remember you taking me, I was like in every segment, And I didn't have this stuff rehearsed. Again, the script was this big, you know, and I would say, you'd go, okay, Jim, do this. And we would walk from point A to point B, and it might be from the floor to the crow's nest. And we were going all over the building. And as we would walk, I would say, you know, and I'm in a hurry, and I haven't been done wrestling in a year. I haven't cut a promo in a year. And I'm like, oh man, I'm stinking the joint up. And I'm, what are we going to do? So I go, here's 12 pages of a speech. What are we getting over here? And as you're not even looking me in the face, you're walking and you say, you threw the bullet points at me. I'd go out there, bang, blow them out, and you'd grab me again. And we had to go somewhere else. So by the end of but the thing I noticed was the heat was insane. Mm-hmm. It was like Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic Wrestling heat. It was like real heat. And, you know, and I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And the other thing that was funny about it, as I remember, the character that was sort of a parallel to Jesus, the Carpenter character, was probably supposed to win or something. And he was Ron Reese, who I was managing, who had like a devil mask on. And somehow the guy blew his knee out or blew his knee out
at the end of big time.
It was in the match, right?
Big time, yeah.
And now you're filming a TV. And this is the epic showdown between good and evil with the Jesus kind of Carpenter character and the big Satan monster hell character with the devil's son-in-law in his corner. And we had to switch gears. And at that point, I remember going to you and saying, okay, Vince, I'll run out there and take a big bump from somebody because, you know, the devil's got to do the job. And you're like, no, bro. And I'm like, no, Vince, really, I need to get beat up. Who can we send? Whatever. I'm panicking. I'm going. And the guy was hurt. I mean,
big time.
He was in tears. Nice
big
guy.
Time. Yeah.
I don't know, twist his leg backwards or something with Ron Reese in the match against the devil. So I'm like, I'm trying how to give a happy finish to this thing. I'm like, can we send Sonny Siaki out? Somebody just give me a big bump. And you said, no, bro. Go up there, whatever. And you had a lightning effect or something. And I don't remember the promo, but the gist of the promo, and I can't remember if it was before. I know the guy had to ad lib. You know, we had to call an audible, and the guy had to ad lib something. I don't remember if that came before or after my final speech. But instead of going out there and taking a bump, which is what I thought was the right thing to do for business, for God, the devil has to do the job. So you send me up there with, you know, the bullet points of a promo, which were basically, ha, 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 too bad for you. You went through all these trials and tribulations, and you were going to put on a big triumphant show for all your measly minions down here in the seats. And at the end of the day, who won? It was something like that. And I was so uncomfortable with it, thinking, this is a church show, and it is my job to do the job. I've got to take the big bump. And you said, no, you're not going to, because in real life, this is what happens. And sometimes the good guys don't win. And bro, this is a shoot. What would happen in real life? And so I walked away from that thinking, wow. And the thing that was great was all those guys came up to me, all the production guys that I had not seen in years, Terry Taylor and all. And again, this is one of those low self-esteem times, right? I built my entire life thinking I'm a wrestling manager, and the one company can employ me because they at least are open to the idea, keeps tossing me away every time I get hot. So, you know, Terry Taylor and Sahadi and these guys I respect, or, you know, Terry Taylor walked up and he said, I know I have no influence in this. And he said, but I promise you, Jim, if I ran a wrestling promotion, you would be there. And, you know, Sahadi, I got all this. And it just, I remember, you know, like I told you, I'm an artsy-fartsy sensitive guy. And it just made me feel great. So fast forward, now you come back to TNA. I get handed the initial script or the start of Sting and Abyss. And I looked at it and I went, oh my God. Vince has lost his mind and he's trying to recreate Ring of Glory here. That's what he's doing. It's now Sting is the carpenter with the broken leg, and Abyss, you know what I mean? And it's going to be the same thing over and over again. And my feeling at the time was, this is not going to play on a national stage. This will work, you know, but I mean, that's where I saw it going. So I'm panicking all day. And I went to Terry Taylor, who I always admired and always went to for good advice. I said, Terry, I get along fine with Vince. I said, but I've never been a disturber, pardon my French for your audience there. I said, but this is dangerous. I said, because if somebody gets fired out of this, who's going to get fired? If somebody complains, the devil's going. He's a scapegoat anyway. That's his job description, is a scapegoat. I'm gone, and I'm having a good time. And he said at the time, he said, Jim, you're overthinking this. You don't know where it's going. But I'm going, look, I said, there's some religious references and something about the highway to hell and all this. And he said, just relax and do it. So I remember I came up to you that afternoon. I think it was the first promo I had to do. Now, at this point, I'm conflicted. I'm like, I like Vince, and I'd like to try new things, but now I'm really in the devil box here. And I might get my ass fired, you know? And so I think the one thing I picked out, as I recall, was I said, okay. And you even told me from day one, you said, no, you don't have to say all this and that. But here, basically, you gave me a script and then gave me points. You know, whereas they used to just give me bullet points, I would look at it and I would say, Vince, what do we need to do? And he'd say, this, and this, and freestyle in between. That's pretty much what you did. So, and what I would always ask you is, what do I specifically need to say? That you need a money shot. What do you need? You said the highway to hell. And I was like, oh my God. I'll be honest with you, I was pissed off. So I went in the ring. When I went in the ring, however I set it up in a way to make a disparaging comment. So it was like, well, what superstitious, foolish people call the highway to hell, or something like that. So I get home and I watch it. And I watch it with my wife. And I'm worrying all week, you know, or however many days it is between tapings. Man, this is going to kill me. And it aired, and she said, well, congratulations, Einstein. She goes, you didn't want to draw attention to religion. You just did. Because the setup to the bump, right. You know, instead of just saying it, you just set it up as if you had disdain. You know, highway to hell wasn't just a catchphrase. Now you're into, you know, religious eschatology. This is a real thing here. So I was like, you know what? You're right. And she said, here's what you need to do. She said, call Vince Russo and just have a conversation with him. And I said, well, he seems like a cool guy, but, you know, we're not. And I don't know anything about your background at this point. All I know is you were the guy who did things on a pole, you know, and David Arquette. That's all I really know about you, you know, as far as your background. So I said, okay, I'm going to call Vince Russo. So I remember I'd pulled up to one of my karaoke gigs. I sat in the parking lot, talked to him for about an hour, but I had a whole speech ready for you. I was going to teach you about old school wrestling, right? I had this whole thing in my head, and I didn't get 5 words out of my mouth. It was like, Vince, we got to have a sit down, you know? So I got like 5 words out of my mouth, and here you pop the wheelie, pop the clutch, whatever you call it. Out comes the Valiant Brothers and Superstar Billy Graham and The Wiz and Blassie and all this stuff that I knew as a kid. And we went, you know, you basically, I mean, I was like, okay, well, he's not an alien from another planet. And he appreciates, I mean, you genuinely appreciated the stuff. You weren't saying this sucks and it doesn't get over. You were like a kid relaying Christmas to somebody, you know? And somewhere in the conversation, like you explained to me your vision. You said that you thought it couldn't go, I forget exactly how you phrased it, but that it couldn't go forward. Basically, it had to evolve somehow. I don't remember the exact words. And I think I brought in probably one of my Marvel Comics allusions, like, you know, he was considered a big heel by what he did in the 60s. And DC thought he was a horrible person, you know, and he was the Antichrist of comic books, but he became the industry leader and set the standard. So I kind of put it in my head that way. And from that point forward, I think you'll agree with this, every day I came to work, I was like this. Fitz, what are we doing? Let's go. I was there early, like, you know, ready to go. And I found it a challenge because I'll give an example. Like when we got into okay, I'm sitting here at a table with the gun thing with Abyss. Now, having initially started in towns where people are known to pull knives on you if you know how to get heat or pull guns, you don't leave that in their minds, you know, or you don't want somebody. My concern was that some little kid at home would shoot somebody or something following it. And I mean, like, look, I'm sitting, I've got a gun here. I like firearms. I keep them around me, but I don't think they have anything to do with wrestling. So as the storyline progresses, that was like another thing I asked you about. But at this point, where I was initially worried that I was going to get buried and my career was going in the toilet, I found, because you had me stop the supervillain crap, and you would tell me, stop doing wrestling promos, right? And it depended on who was producing me. Sometimes you didn't get your hands on me, and sometimes Demore or whoever would be there, or Dutch, who wanted me to be a James Bond villain. But you produced something very different, which added depth. So every time I would come back home, be worried about something. Now, the same people, you know, the mainstream big-time wrestling press that I'm worried about killing me, they're glowing over it. This is great, and character depth, and we've never seen this much depth out of Jim Mitchell, and he's going to do places. And I'm thinking, well, you know what? If I was talking about beating you in the middle of the ring for the belt, I wouldn't have a chance to go into those places, you know? So it all led up to the thing, the final where we had to do the money promo for revealing that I was Abyss's dad. And I remember sitting back, and it was only a few minutes before we went to air. So by this point, I mean, I'm fully invested, and me and Sting are cool. I thought Sting was going to be a problem. Hell no, Sting was great. Total pro to work with. Certainly seemed to be an advocate of mine at the time. The great guy. So, I mean, I'm loving work. And it's like working out a crossword puzzle or something. This is not my comfort zone. Somehow every time I crawl through that, I grow. You know what I mean? I grow. Something new comes out, and I get something, you know. And so I'm really loving it. And we went to do the promo in the back, and I remember I started it out, and we didn't have time. You know, it was like trying to freestyle. And you and Pat Kinney were there, and you said, "Stop, Jim, you're doing a wrestling promo." And I said, "Okay." So I'd start again. "Well, Abyss, Jim, stop. You're doing a wrestling promo." And you did that to me probably it's probably the most I've ever been stopped in a promo in my life, a 1 or 2 take guy. And you took me to the side and you said, "Jim, get that out of your head. Here's the deal. What I want you to do is really think about this. If your son shot you in the back and did whatever the specifics were, how would you really talk to that guy?" Which is different than any direction I had been given before. If you weren't around, they always wanted to laugh, which I wasn't comfortable with. You know what I mean? Or they wanted me to go click Doomsday, the same old stuff over and over again. So I said, "Give me a minute," you know, and the clock's ticking as it usually was. And I walked around in a corner and I thought about the words you said to me. How would you really feel if your son shot you in the back? You wouldn't burst into his door and say, "Let me tell you something, son." You know, it would be a whole different delivery. And so I walked in a corner, I walked around in circles, and I thought about ways that I was legitimately pissed off at Abyss for various reasons. You know, I only have problems with the guys I manage, not with anybody else. But I thought about all that baggage, and I brought up some old stuff in my head with other people I was pissed off at in my life. And I went out there and we did the thing in one take, and boom. Now I'm worried with that. It's all over. It's all over. I've shot my load. It's all done. Pardon. It's done. And it got over. You know, I mean, the thing was the people who were the biggest haters, people who hate me, people who hate you, people who hate TNA, were going, "Wow, that was some compelling television." And I remember I got done with that. I was crying when I got done. I don't know if you remember that. I had tears in my eyes when I got done cutting that promo. And I was trying to round you up. And I was like, "Well, I'm in the moment, guys. You want to get some shots of me crying? Maybe we can do something with them, you know, throw them in a package." And I felt like just a door. I hear actors talk about this kind of thing, and I'm not a trained actor, but I think it's what it was, like a door opened. So I was thinking, now I can grab that on command. You know what I mean? It's like learning to ride a bike. Now you know where that secret latch is to open and grab that emotion. So that's why I was like, wow, I was weird. You know, I don't care. You could book me and you could write any kind of story for me. At that point, I'm thinking I've got it, and then they sent me home, and I never came back.
Well, Jim, and I'm glad you laid that out. Because let me ask you a question. In your opinion, why is that not happening today? Why are stories like that and scenes like that, why have they been replaced by great wrestlers, same size, same gimmick, same moves? Why?
No, I'm assuming you're referring to TNA. And this,
no,
I'll be honest.
In
I don't
general,
watch it.
same
I don't
thing.
watch wrestling, so I couldn't tell you.
Same thing, Jim. Same thing. WWE will have wrestling matches that go through break, and the matches are 12 minutes long. They go through the commercial. They pick it up at the other end. There's zero drama in the show. Why?
Okay. Again, because I don't watch it. What I know of wrestling, I see reading news boards, or occasionally if a friend of mine is on something, I'll watch what he did on YouTube. But going back to what we said 2 hours ago, I think the big problem is there's not enough talent that knows how to. There's either not enough people that have the talent to pull it off, right? So you've got Quentin Tarantino trying to direct a third grade Thanksgiving play. Or the problem is you don't have people in the key spots that have the ability to bring that talent out. And if you would have asked me 2 years before it happened, would Vince Russo be a guy that could have given me an epiphany that took me to the next level in what I could pull out of myself? I would have said no. It's not. Vince is a cool guy, but hell no, he can't do that. But you did. And it took me, and I'm absolutely true, almost with a tear in my eye now. It took me to a new place. And I found a talent within myself. But somehow, the way you broke it down to me worked. I don't know if it's agents. I don't know if it's the writers. I don't know, because I'm not in that world anymore.
Well, Jim, I'll tell you, I think it's a combination of a lot of the things you said, but I think part of it starts with them recruiting the wrong talent. They're recruiting.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, they're recruiting the rest. Jim, I could tell you, back in 1997, Vince McMahon and I had a conversation, the two of us, nobody else, and we were talking about have somebody go at the corner of Hollywood and Vine, have them sit there for 3 hours and have them grab all the characters they see on the corner of Hollywood and Vine and then teach those people how to wrestle. Other than get the wrestlers that just know how to wrestle. The most over guy, Jim, now on WWE, as far as I'm concerned, is Mike Rotundo's kid, a guy by the name of Wyatt. Who does he look like? Unbelievable! They can't touch him. And meanwhile, this guy's been sitting home for the last 3 weeks. Hey, Jim, I want to ask you a personal question. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before. Okay. And I think about it for a lot of reasons. When I'm talking about characters, I'm talking about let's eliminate all the wrestlers from that. Let's eliminate the Austins and the Rocks and the Foleys. The two straight up characters that I worked with, managers, who were the most talented by far. One in TNA, one in WWE. TNA, James Mitchell.
Thank you.
WWE, Paul Bearer.
Yeah.
Do you think, but let me ask you something, being that Paul was so tremendous and had such an unbelievable run in the WWE, do you think that might have hampered you from ever going to that company during that time?
Vince, I have no idea what the deal was with WWE. And I'll be honest with you, from day one, I never was under the delusion that WWE offered me a job. And, they kind of, whatever, I had a little little misstep with them, or well, that doesn't matter. They kind of disrespected me about in 2009, but it wasn't their fault. It was Steve Kern's fault. Anyway, I never felt that I deserved a job. You know what I mean? Because I know that's the show. That there's a whole different level, and what I bring to the table may not what they want. But to answer your question about Paul Bearer, I don't know.
Wait, I gotta stop you right there. You never deserved a shot on a personal level or a professional level.
No, I mean on a personal level. I don't sit and go, okay, I'm pissed off at TNA, and I try to be positive about it, which is why I don't do these interviews. But because I delivered the goods and I was a proven commodity, yeah, I'm kind of offended that after 6.5 years, after nobody ever came to me and said, can we repackage you? You know, you repackaged people over and over and over again who sucked. And they continued to suck after you repackaged them. But they kept being on TV while I'm sitting in the backyard, TNA's backyard. Yo, you need somebody to tell a story? You're doing less wrestling? Come to throw me a bone? Nothing. But I wasn't going to call, and I wasn't going to grovel. Never have, never will. But so yeah, back to the WWE thing. So with WWE, they don't know who I am. They don't care who I am, right? And I know that that's a whole different, because I had never proven myself there. That's why that debacle went on with in the Florida Championship Wrestling thing with Steve Kern, because JR told me to go there and told me the procedure to go through, and they gave me a tryout date. And then when I showed up, they tried to charge me $1,000. I was like, are you out of your mind? And didn't know who I was. After I said, that didn't even bother me, but I'm like, bro, I'm not paying you if you would have told me you need $1,000 for me to walk in your building, I would have said thank you, but no thanks. But you know what I mean? But still, I don't know what happened with WWE, and I don't know. I know people from time to time, to go back to Percy, Paul Bearer. Depending on who you're reading, there'll be people who say, "Oh, James Mitchell is a Paul Bearer knock." Well, if that's what you believe, then you haven't watched very much of either one of us. Mm-hmm. He is an Undertaker or a mortician. And he's the Addams Family version of that. And he was you talk about the zeitgeist being right with Taker and the way he presented it. Yeah, he was an over-the-top cartoon character. And you know what? It was perfect. It was exactly what the gimmick needed. Percival Pringle from Memphis wouldn't have fit that character at all. At all. It would have been hillbilly bullshit. That was perfect. Perfect matchup in talent. Do I think that affected me? I don't know. I mean, I don't understand how they work up there. I mean, over the years, there have been people, like I said last year, 2012, a writer called me and told me to get ready. I was coming. I was going to be with Tensai. I found out that didn't happen. And then something else. And the last one I was told was, okay, get ready. We've got a guy with a fresh coat of paint. Are you ready for anything? They had me cut a promo, send a tape to him. They had the new, I forget what his name was. He didn't last there very long, but he was the new head of vice president of talent relations or something. Specifically had to make a tape for him, which he was supposed to give to Triple H and Vince, and supposedly never did. And I got a phone call one day from the writer saying, I don't know if you watched Raw last night, but we decided to go with Dutch Mantel as the manager of Jack Swagger. I didn't even know what they wanted for me. And I was cool with that too, because I couldn't do what Dutch does. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Dutch is that kind of guy, kind of. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And but I don't know. You tell me.
I'll tell you right now.
I mean, here's my question to you. Surely, let me put you on the spot a little bit here. Yep. The day I got the call, because I'd been telling TNA for like 3 months, man, my contract's running up, and you got like another 2 years. You're going to owe me like, I forget what it was, $5 or $6 grand or something. I said, can I come in, Terry? I said, I want to earn my keep, and I want to learn other aspects of the wrestling business. I said, can I come and be like an agent for promos? I wanted to do something, or I'll sit in the truck and work with Sahadi and learn. I wanted to learn all that. No, nothing, never came of it. And then, so when I called Terry to say, look, we're out, the contract's rolled over. And he said, well, we're also elected. Yeah, that's true. But now we're electing to the escape hatch clause, whatever, And it was like, Vince, and that's, again, to this day, maybe you can help me through some of this because you were there. It was like, I got along with everybody there. I was friendly to everybody. I was top tier talent. I was in model employee. I was a good guy. I didn't show up for work incapacitated. I didn't show up for work in no condition to perform. I didn't get on TMZ and cause problems like other people did, right? So it was like being handed a divorce paper from your perfect marriage. And it was just basically somebody saying, I don't love you anymore. And I was like, how do I fight that? Am I going to get on Twitter and say they suck? Am I going to, you know what I mean? And it was like, just suck it up and accept it and hope that maybe they're going to change their mind. But and I really did think it was going to be one of those things where it might take another year before they call me. And then they started ECW reboot or something. And again, I'm in their backyard. They don't call me, but they bring in a fake Blue Meanie or something. I forget what it was. And it got to the point to where I would alternate between I'm furious. Why am I turning on the TV and seeing somebody who can't talk while I'm, you know what I mean? So when the day came down into the thing where they said, we don't have a place for James Mitchell. However, next week, Hermie Sadler is going to have a hot seat. The devil can't have the hot seat interview segment, but Hermie has a hot seat. What's going on in the room? What kind of discussion is going on where they say, because I'm just trying to put some closure onto it, where they say there is no place for him? What was going on?
Well, I would tell you two things, Jim. This is what I would think, because again, it's like, man, I wish I could remember specifically.
Sure.
But this is what I'll tell you, two overlaying things with TNA. One is much bigger than the other, okay? And Jim, one of them is like almost unbelievable to say, okay? Dixie Carter, I hate to say this and I hate to use this word, but after owning the company for so many years, Jim, was still such a mark that if Jim Mitchell would be the devil on television and was getting heat because that was his job and that's what he was paid to do, because you were getting heat and people were booing and hissing you, Dixie did not like Jim Mitchell. Not that she you should laugh. This is a shoot, Jim. This is a shoot.
I figured there was something like that because it just made no sense.
Yeah, so literally, bro, if you're getting heat and people are booing you and she doesn't like you because of your character, a lot of times that transforms into her not liking you. Okay, right. That's number one. Number two, you got to understand too, Jim, 99% of those decisions at TNA at that time, especially right around the time when you left, bro, it was all dollars and cents. You got to understand, Jim, when you're bringing in Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff and all the people they want to bring in with them, right? And Jim, when you're bringing them in, and that means because you're paying this part of the budget over here, over here, you can't even do any promotion, marketing, or advertising. Right. You can't even promote your own house shows because you're giving all the money over here. Well, then, of course, the Jim Mitchells, in the mix. Of course, you're going to be the first ones to go because that's easy. Sure. So much on TNA, so much of it, bro, came down to dollars and cents. I'm not going to lie to you, Jim. Bro, around that same time when Hogan and Bischoff came in, they cut my money. No reason. Vince, you need to be making less money now. I knew I needed to be making less money so they could pay Hogan and Bischoff. But, bro, I was such a sucker that I wanted the company to succeed. So if the company, meaning the company succeeds means you take some of my money and put it over here, that's what you do. But at the end of the day, Jim, 99% of that was just dollars and cents. To this day, bro,
you would say it's more dollars and cents than Dixie had a personal issue with my character.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and see, here's the thing that pisses me off with wrestling. I think it's the most bullshit cop out. It's the politically correct answer when you say, "What happened?" Well, we decided to go in a different direction.
Yeah, that's bull. That's
be a man. Say I don't like you. Say you farted. Say you drink too much. Jim, say you got a bad haircut.
Jim, you know what it is?
But don't say that.
Jim, it's that one I hate. That one that we're going in another direction from a writer. You know which is the one that drives me crazy? Creative has nothing for you.
Yes, that was the other thing.
Because my question always, every time I hear that, you know what I say? If creative has nothing for them and they're a talent on TV, why isn't creative getting fired?
Right.
Why is it creative should be the one going if they don't have something for James Mitchell?
That's the thing. That should be the easiest part of your job. If you've got me or Bubba or somebody who can talk, that should be pretty easy. That should be the easiest part of your day. Now you got to worry about what to do with Mr. X Division, and you're going to have to do 42 takes of his promo and try to get him to be convincing. That's hard, but I don't know.
Jim, can I tell you what part of it is too? You want to be honest? I'll be perfectly honest with you. You know what part of it is too? Having a character like you that is so many levels and putting together a story with the Sting and that's so many levels, right? It's too hard, bro. It's too hard and it's too time consuming. Put two guys in the ring and let them wrestle. I'm telling you, bro, it's all those things that come into play. I'll tell you, hey, Jim, I'll tell you right now, I'm doing this gimmick on the show now where I'm so disgusted with Raw and it's so horrible. And, my business here depends on that show being good. So the thing I do every Monday is I book my own Raw. Like I'm writing for the WWE before their show comes on TV. I'm writing my own script and I'm putting it out there. Right. This Kane character, Jim, you couldn't kill this character if you really attempted to. Like, if Vince McMahon found out that Kane slept with his wife and was purposely trying to kill him, he couldn't have done as good a job as they've done. Okay. Part of my Raw is, you want the old Kane back, the guy that we created as Undertaker's brother that was as over as Undertaker one time and you've killed. I'll tell you what, there's a guy sitting home in Florida with the red suit that could get Kane more over tomorrow than he's been over in the last 5 years. It's that freaking simple. Sometimes, Jim, I just think it's too much work for these people. Nobody wants to do the work.
Is it true that they have something like 20 writers on that show?
30 writers.
And okay, when they really took off, I mean, I don't know. Again, here's the thing. And I always have to correct myself because Vince McMahon's only obligation is to his pocketbook, right? So I'm pretty sure at the end he'll do whatever works best. But originally, when they had that long-term planning, him and Pat Patterson and Gorilla Monsoon and Willie Gilzenberg would sit down and plan a whole year. They planned from WrestleMania to WrestleMania, and that's where they went, And it didn't require a whole room of people fighting about stuff. I mean, I can't imagine being in that job. I mean, it sounds like I used to hear years ago it was 3 or 4 people, and it sounds like it's grown and grown and grown. How many people? TNA creative when you were there? How many people were sitting around a table when you had to do that?
When I was there at TNA?
Yeah, the last time you were there.
The last time I was there, well, it was basically myself, Matt Conway, and Eric would sit in with us.
Okay, and then there were other people sitting around with
Oh, well,
notebooks
yeah, well, that
chiming
bro.
in, right?
Then it would be the agents meeting. Then the agents would chime in. So it was
Okay.
there was always somebody chiming in. But Jim, can you imagine? Hey, listen to what you're saying. The level of the storytelling we did with you, Sting and Abyss, with the shooting the father, the scene in the restaurant, the whole nine
Right.
yards. Can you imagine trying to write that scene with 30 people involved?
No.
It can't be done. It can't be done. That's why you're seeing what you see today.
Well, I got to ask you this too, and you're gone from there, so it doesn't matter. But this again is something that annoys the hell out of me about TNA. Sweet Dixie, never been anything but a gentleman. A very nice woman to me, at least to my face. Cordial, courteous, whatnot. Called me twice after she fired me. Right, nice class act that way. But then, Hogan and Bischoff come in, and I see this is like Memphis 101. Dixie's in every segment. And Dixie is a nice woman. And Dixie's, if you're talking to her face is well-spoken and polite and has that old Southern charm. But she's not a TV star. And would you have gone to Vince McMahon in 1999 let's say 1998. Would you have gone to him and said, there's a 50-year-old MILF in Tennessee you need to bring on, and we need to put her in every segment against Sable because she's funny? You wouldn't have done that, would you? Maybe you would.
You know what I got to can I tell you something though, bro? Much to his defense, okay? Eric Bischoff, okay? Much to his defense, did not ever want to see Dixie Carter on television.
So who did? Dixie?
Dixie Carter started being on television every week after Eric Bischoff was sent home.
Okay.
So the new kid on the block. The new kid on the block.
Okay, gotcha. But you see, I mean, that's
absolutely. I see what you mean. Of course, of course, it is
101. And the thing, I don't want to talk badly about anybody, but here's where where wrestlers and people get mixed up in the wrestling bubble can become, because there's a whole sexy, I don't mean sexual, but a sexiness and an allure to being on TV, right. And you get blinded. I mean, stuff that I used to think was great just because I saw myself on TV, I look at it now and it sucked. You know what I mean? You get blinded to it. But Dixie, it's like, do you remember the fairy tale or the Aesop's fable or whatever, the emperor and his clothes, where the emperor was sewn some naked clothes by some con men, and at the end of the day he's marching through town naked and doesn't know he looks like a buffoon because he thinks the people around him have sewn him an invisible suit. And that's how I see Dixie doing things, and it's frustrating to me, which is why I won't watch the product, and I also won't get out publicly and comment on it because I'm not going to watch it. But I'm thinking, Dixie, just take me out of the equation, take yourself off TV, so you have some objectivity. Take yourself off TV, get out of every segment, sit over here and worry about dollars and cents. And then look at your numbers, look at your ratings, and see what happens. And get back. And I don't know, but I'm pretty sure because it happens to anybody. Get out, quit looking at your own reflection in the mirror, and get back to what's make ratings for that company. And I want that company to succeed. I don't want Vince McMahon to be the only opportunity, the only product, but it's just, it's so frustrating to love wrestling. Yep. And of course, I'll tell you straight up, what I hate most about wrestling is that I'm not in it. I'll tell you that straight. That's what I hate most about it. But other than that, it's just, I don't agree with a lot of stuff Vince McMahon does. But I would never call decisions he makes stupid per se, because if he makes a stupid decision, he usually corrects it pretty fast. I think. But I see TNA not learning from history, not do, you know what I mean?
Jim, you know what it is? Here's where everybody makes their mistake. It's really this simple, and this is business 101. I believe this wholeheartedly. Everybody has one thing that they're really good at. Uh-huh. When those people try to become something that they're not, that's when you start running into problems. It's that simple. Like, that's why, Jim, as the head of creative, I never told a wrestler what to do in the ring. I wasn't a wrestler. So, like, what I always say is stay in your lane. If everybody stays in their lane and does what they do best, you should have a very successful company. That's why Vince McMahon, has hired the Kevin Dunns and the Jim Rosses and the people to put in spots that weren't his strong suit. And as long as everybody does what they do best, you should have a successful company. When the owner now puts their priority on being a television star, something's going to get lost in the shuffle.
Right. Oh, let me ask you this, and you're wondering what your take would be on this. You were still on creative when Bischoff was there, right?
Yeah.
When they brought in Flair and Foley and Hogan.
Yep.
So now TNA is more top heavy with real household names. Now you've got not one or two that come on TV every once in a while. You got real stars, household names are there every week. Now, here's the few times I, just as a fan tuning in, and I wonder as a writer what this would do to you. When you would see, and I understand trying to give the rub to people, right? You would see Flair or Hogan or Foley standing next to, just guys who aren't over or are unproven as characters. And to me, the first thing I would see is that guy's a star and I'm not paying attention to this guy over here. Do you know what I mean? But I understand. I think they were trying to give the other guy the rub, from the star, but it seemed like to me, if I was sitting in creative, I would have said, you cannot put Ric Flair in a segment with this kid over here because it's gonna make everybody look at Ric Flair and it's gonna make them realize how much not a Ric Flair, how much further this guy has to be before a Ric Flair type of guy. So as a writer, did you ever have to come up against that? Were you told you have to put Mr. X Division in a segment with Hulk Hogan, and how do you make this work without exposing? And that's a good. Heyman would never do that because he's not going to let somebody look stupid, and he's not going to expose your weaknesses. But I saw once you brought the names in, and you got to use the names. That's why you're paying them. But I thought they weren't careful, and I can't. I'm talking out at this point because I didn't pay that much attention to the show, but I do remember thinking, wow, you're exposing that this younger guy that you need to be bringing up he's not Elvis Presley. Well, how do you work with that?
Well, you got two problems. You got two problems. First of all, some of these guys like Hogan and Flair, and again, I don't know what anybody made. I didn't care what anybody made. I know Hogan and Flair were getting paid well to come to TNA. So first of all, you're paying these guys very well who are very limited. They can't wrestle. They're and if they wrestle, it's once a month. So, you want to put them on TV for the star power, but they're very limited to what they could do physically. Right. On the other scale of that roster, you've got a lot of young guys that probably, Jim, and I've said this publicly before, have no business being on TV. Forget about being in the same ring with Ric Flair. Have no business being on TV. But the problem is, Jim, these younger guys have a 2-year contract or 3-year contract. So now you got these megastars who can't do anything physically. You got these younger guys who shouldn't have a contract, but somehow got a 2-3-year contract. You got to do something with Flair. You got to do something with the younger guys. And that's what you try to do. And, again, that's never going to get over. But like I said, that comes down to those guys shouldn't have had a contract in the first place. That's my opinion. Like when you talk about Paul Lee, do you think Paul Lee was obligated to paying somebody for 2 or 3 years? So he easily could have said, you know what? You did your thing for the last 6 weeks. We don't need you anymore. We didn't have that. We didn't have that luxury at TNA.
Right. And I don't know why. Here's another, just a business thing. You sign people, and I'm obviously not a great businessman, but you sign people to exclusive contracts so people aren't going to steal them. The reality, going back to what you said, a lot of the people that they tied up in these contracts, Vince wasn't going to call them anyway. You know what I mean? You didn't have to be obligated. You could have told 5'8", 175-pound kick pound guy. And again, I don't make that as a personal insult, but that's what they are. If you could have told that guy, I'll call you each week when I need you. Because tying that person up and obligating him to be on TV and forcing the writers to have to use somebody who wasn't ready for that spot. Again, that to me, that's screwed up business. No, you have to use a bunch of guys who aren't ready to be on TV.
And you know what that is? You know what that is, Jim? That's a case of a owner who's influenced by the internet, and she's reading about what great workers these guys are, not understanding they may be great workers, but that's not what's going to get them over on a national level. So you got the internet saying they're great workers. You know, you want to tell everybody you're a wrestling show. Let's grab these guys and sign them up long term. Bad business. It is bad business.
And you know what? I'm pretty sure, because we seem to hear this knock every time an internet darling gets signed by WWE, whether it was RVD or Chris Jericho or Daniel Bryan. When they first come in there, they have to basically relearn.
Absolutely.
Like I told you when I first got to WCW, everything I knew was wrong. So they have to reteach them how the proper way to do things. But in TNA, they don't do that. They don't, because they're at this point, they're like, we don't care how many flips you cut. Are people yelling that was ants? Hold on, we don't care if people are yelling that was awesome. We care about how many T-shirts you're going to sell. So Daniel Bryan, and I forget what his catchphrase was, but whatever. What you're going to work on, that's what's over. That's what you're going to go with. They're worried about the money, whereas. And they didn't care about the internet. In fact, it was probably a bad thing to come behind you in WWE. They want to erase that. For TNA, I don't know, the TNA to be worrying about that is just, they don't understand what they're doing.
Jim, you know what it is, and I say this is this tells you it in a nutshell, and then after this we'll wrap it up. But this tells you it in a nutshell. You know, like as the head of creative, you know what Vince Russo's role was. And bro, there's not enough hours in a week to be head of creative. There's not. You had Jim Ross, who was head of talent relations at WWE at the same time. You know what type of a job head of talent relations is. Both jobs, bro, there's not enough hours in the week to do either job successfully. TNA has one guy doing both jobs. Right. That tells you right there that model alone is telling you this cannot and will not be successful.
But you know what? I would think if you got rid of 10, how many people are on the roster at the most? 60 at one point? Was there 60?
Oh, yeah, at one point. Probably now more like 35, 40.
Okay, but in the day, why don't you get rid of 20 of those people and hire 20 people who can produce promos and use the camera, because you know how tight it was trying to get stuff done backstage back then. When I worked the WWE pay-per-view in 2005, wow, you talk about first class. I mean, that was a ship, man. That was a machine. TNA was even, everything was under the gun, no time for finesse. And I would have said, you know what? Why don't you get rid of 20 of these guys, hire 20 lighting guys or 20 sound guys, 20 producers, and let them bring their finesse to what you have and bring it up. And then when you get, the one or two guys that you kind of see coming on the bottom, that's why you've got these extra guys who have extra time. They can sit in a room with this guy and work with him and try to develop his talent. That's where I think the money should have gone. But what do I know? I don't have a wrestling company.
But then again, Jim, there are those people that like the idea of wrestlers working for them. You see what I'm saying? It's a big difference to have a wrestler with a name working under you than Sam the lighting guy.
Sure.
That comes into play. But Jim, listen, man, we can go on all day. I'm going to bring you on again as a guest. I mean, because there's a lot we didn't talk about. I mean, I could have you on here all day. And listen, I'm writing that storyline. And I'm gonna write it exactly what I would do this day that would still work to your talents and get you even more over than you ever were throughout your entire career. But again, Jim, I can't, seeing the talent I see in the business today and seeing James Mitchell, not in it, bro, I scratch my head just as much as you do.
Well, thank you, Vince. I haven't talked about wrestling this much in 6 years. So it was kind of to scratch the itch. And I thank you for having me on. And as always, being a pleasant guy.
I do too, Jim. And I thank you very much. And you'll be hearing from me.
Cool. Be well, man.
All right. Take care, Jim.
Be well. Bye.
Bye.